Welcome to another episode of It Had to Be Said podcast, where we say out loud what you think in private. No topic is off limits. In today's podcast, I want to talk about some of the dysfunction and some of the violence and some of the typical stereotypes that are happening within the Black community, primarily the negative stereotypes that are happening in the Black community. And what brought this on was a recent case that happened where we had three Black male minors involved in a horrific crime, and the victim was a female minor as well. I will leave the link in the description, and you guys can look into the story itself. But I just want to start off by saying when situations like this happen, the Black community is asking the question, how did this happen, right? And who's to blame? And from my personal perspective, I always say anytime a child messes up or a child does something, the first place you should look at is their home. Secondly, you should look at that community, who they're surrounded by. The reason why I say you should look at the home is because I recently did a podcast on that where we talked about lazy parenting. There's a lot of people that having kids and they're not involved in their kids' lives. And to sum it all up, I just look at it from a very simple perspective. If your child is under the age of 16, that means your child's not able to work. Anything that you buy your child, anything that your child has, actually, you have to buy for them. If you buy a child a smartphone, a laptop, a tablet, you should put parental restrictions on there so your child cannot do certain things. Granted, yes, your child will still find a way to get access to the internet. Your child will still find a way to open up social media accounts. But you at least have to do that part where they're not sitting there on social media all the time, posting stuff, and you're not checking up and following up on them. When I had kids, I did not get my kids a smartphone until they were in high school. The reason for that, because I understood the power of the smartphone. They can go online, they can open up social media accounts, they can watch adult films on there. It's just a lot of things you can do on a smartphone. So I just gave them a regular phone that did not have a touch screen or anything else like that while they were middle school. And guess what? I never got a call from the teachers saying, "Oh, my kids are using their phone while in class." The reason for that is because my kids were too embarrassed to pull the phone out and use it in public, because the phone was really just to call us in case of an emergency or something happened. Granted, when they got in high school and they got the smartphone, when they got home, their phone was not allowed in their room. The phone stayed on the living room table. And if the phone, and I had access to it, and my wife had access to it. So if something was to happen, if we wanted to go into their phone and check and see what's going on in there, we could. We had to be involved parents because I understood the amount of risk and pressure there was out there, you know. And yes, my kids did get a social media account and I found out about it and I had them delete it. And, of course, you expect kids to do the same things that we did. We were kids at one point in time. So you don't expect your kid to be perfect, but you got to put safeguards in place. Another thing that happened here, I loved hip hop music. DMX was one of my favorite artists. DMX, Nas, Jay-Z. We listened to Biggie, Pac, you know, and the thing about it was I never listened to rap music around my kids. My kids thought I hate rap music. We had this thing when I was in the car with them, I listened to what they call sleepy music. It was classical music. And I knew my kids listened to rap music, but I did not want them to feel comfortable speaking like that and acting and dressing like that around me or around any other adults. I wanted them to understand, like, yo, that is entertainment. That is not a way of life. And that's not something that I'm going to tolerate and accept in my house. So I feel like as parents we have to be extremely involved in our kids' lives. I had this thing. I remember my son, actually, he asked his mom for these pair of joggers. At the time, these joggers were pants that, like, at the foot, towards the bottom, they were kind of tight, and then towards the top part where it goes around the waist, it could sit on your waist, but if you look at it from the back, it was kind of really loose, so it looked like it was sagging. And I remember one day we came home from school and I looked at him. I'm like, lift up your shirt. And he'd lift up his shirt, which is something I always did. 'Cause I didn't like him having his parents sag. And I knew the pressure that there was at the school and, in the middle school and high school to kind of fit in that way. And I said, no. He said, no, these are on my waist. They're not hanging. You can't see my underwear. I was like, okay. So I said, well, so I go to his mom, I'm like, who bought those? And she's like, well, he said he wanted a pair, so I bought them. And she's like, but that's what all the other kids are wearing. And I had to explain to her, I don't give a damn what the other kids are wearing. I don't want my kid to fit in. I don't want my kid to fit in with the 99 percenters, which are the freaking losers. I want my kid to be part of the 1% club. I don't need them to fit in with everybody else. I want my kids to be different. If they feel like they have to fit in with everyone else, then my child is going to be a follower. He's not going to be a leader, you know? And that's one of the things that I think a lot of parents need to do. They need to understand. And I had to sit down with my wife and explain that to her. She like, it's just clothes. And I had to explain to her, look, who is your child trying to imitate when he wears certain things? If he has his hair a certain way, who is he trying to imitate? If he talks a certain way, who is he trying to imitate? Now, the people that he's imitating when he talks like that, dressed like that, or whatever the case may be, do you want your child to end up like that person he's imitating? And and if it's a no, then don't encourage it, you know? And I think that's one of the major issues that's happening within the Black community. We have a lot of people that are just being lazy parents. They're wanting their kids to fit in. They're not paying attention to who their kids are imitating, and they're not asking themselves the question of, if my kid is imitating this person, talking like that and doing this, then that's more than likely who they're going to end up like. And do I want my kid to end up like that? And if the answer is a no, then get involved. You hear the excuse of, well, I got to work 2 jobs, 3 jobs to support them. Okay, if you have to work 2, 3 jobs to support them, do you have a partner? No, their father's not in their lives. Okay, so you have girls, then you need to tell your girls, hey, as your mother, I made a mistake. I got with a guy who was not responsible. And so, therefore, you need to make sure that you don't make the same mistake. And if you have a son, you need to tell your son, look, your father's not in your life. I don't want you to be like that. I want you to be a responsible young man. And if you do meet somebody and you're serious with the person, you have a child, take responsibility. Your kids can learn from your mistake, and it's okay to tell your kids you messed up on certain things, so this way they can learn from those lessons and have conversations with them. But you cannot be living in a messed up situation and kind of brag about it like it's normal or you're getting over on the government. And that leads me into my next point, which is, as a community, we have this thing where, if you think about Social Security, if you think about welfare, Section 8, and food stamps, most people think, oh, black folks, black folks, black folks. That is not the case. You have to understand, in the United States, whites are still the majority. There's more white folks on food stamps, Section 8, and government assistance than there are black folks. The key difference is this: white people, they don't brag about it, they don't bring it to light. It's something that they kind of hide, they kind of a little bit of ashamed of. Whereas in the black community, not every black person, but in the black community, in general, as in the black community, is something that is bragged upon and that they kind of showboat, and that's why it's mainly associated with black people on food stamps and Section 8. More white people on that than black folks. The other thing about it is, when you come down to the community, is crime rate. You always sit there and say, well, why is the crime rate so high within the black community and it's not hardly any crime there happening in the white community? Everybody wants to blame the police. They want to blame the system. They want to blame the man that doesn't exist. No, that is not the case. If you think about it, black people, they're the reason. Black people, in the mindset that is happening in the black community, is the reason why there's so many crimes in their community. Take, for example, you have this thing that they call not snitching. Somebody can commit a crime in the black community, everybody knows who did it. Whether it's a murder, armed robbery, theft, everybody, or just about everybody in the neighborhood, knows who did it. Nobody snitches. Nobody opens up their mouth and tells who did it. Whereas if you look at the white community, you can do something. Your neighbors, your auntie, your mother, your uncle, they're going to go ahead and they're going to report you. So if you do get a white person in your neighborhood who family is going to support that criminal shenanigans, guess what? The whole community is going to rally and snitch on that person every time they commit a crime. And when the family members come out and they try to talk, whatever, everybody's going to call the police and make it very uncomfortable, to eventually that family, that criminal and their family, end up moving out of the community, and the community becomes some place of peace. So I think if that was something that was done or tried within the black community, eventually you would get rid of the bad apples and their family members who support them in their shenanigans, and eventually the black community or certain black communities will become communities of peace. But because a criminal knows they can commit a crime with no mask on in broad daylight, and nobody's going to tell on them. This is why criminals in the Black community are so emboldened to do things, because they understand there's no consequences to it. The community itself is going to protect them. Now, going back to this case with these two young men who did this horrific thing, and they're being charged as adults. I have a very unique perspective on this. I think that parents should also be held accountable for the crimes that the kids commit. If you're able to go back and look at these kids' records in school, or or in the judicial system, and you're able to see that these kids were problem kids, and the parents did not do anything about it, did not report them, did not try to intervene, then any action that those kids took as minors, their parents should also hold some level of accountability for that as well. Because, you know, I remember my ex-wife, she was a teacher. And, she would come in and she would tell me all the time, because she taught in the urban communities, and she would say, I taught I have a student, they were giving me problems, and I told them they cannot come back to my class, and I gave them a note, and I told them they can't come back to my class until I speak to their parents. And the students themselves would tell my ex-wife at the time, tell my wife at the time, which is currently my ex-wife, they would tell her, well, my parents are gonna come here and cuss you out anyway. And that's exactly what the parent would do. The parent would come in and cuss out my wife and say, you don't like my child, and believe whatever the child's saying. So that parent is enforcing the belief to that child, and is showing that child that they can do whatever they want to, and the parent has their back. And that's not a good thing. That is not a good thing. And I learned from that, because when I had my son, I remember, I did not want my son to fit in, so I didn't get him the Jordans, the Nikes, and all this stuff. I just got him the basic shoes. And I remember that one year I got him the Jordans, and he actually cried because he never believed that I would get him like a pair of Jordans. And I think he was like 10th grade or something. I finally got him his first pair of Jordans. And he didn't have those, and I got it for him for Christmas, I believe. Yeah, it was Christmas I got it for him. And he did not have those shoes for more than 2 months. I remember I got him the shoes, and right after I got him the shoes, within 2 months, I remember I got a call from my wife, and she's like, "Hey, I got a call from his teacher, and she wants me to come to the school." And I said, "Okay, cool." I said, "When you pick him up from school, I don't need you to ask him no questions. When you pick him up from school, take these sandals with you, have them switch out into the sandals, have them take off the shoes, pull up to the Walmart, and drop the shoes into the drop box, the donation box." And she's like, "No, but we just spent $100 and something on those shoes." And I had to explain to her, I don't care how much money I spent on the shoes. I don't care what it takes. I want to show my child that I will throw away money to discipline them, to teach them right from wrong. And so she did that. And the car was quiet on the ride home. And when they got home, and she's like, and she goes, and I go, well, I remember I said to her, because at the time I was at work, so I told her to deliver the message for me. I said, let him know the teacher called. You don't need to hear his side of the story. Only thing you know, the reason why you threw away his shoes is because the teacher called. And there was no reason for the teacher to call and say that she needs to see her, that they need to see us because he was being disruptive in class. There's no explanation for that. I don't want to hear the teacher don't like you. I don't want to hear nothing. Only thing I know is that I send you to school to learn, and there's no reason the teacher should call me to tell me you're disturbing your class. And from that point on, we never really got any calls from the teachers after that. Or maybe it was like one incident after that. I remember that was one serious incident after that. But after that, like, we really didn't get any calls from the teachers. And our kids never opened up their mouths to say the teacher just don't like me. You know? And you have to discipline your kids like that. Now, my kids are not perfect. They're gonna make mistakes. But I think when you're an involved parent and you're doing things like that, and you're teaching your kids right from wrong, and you're letting them know, like, I love you, but I'm not gonna support everything that you do that's wrong. And there is a cutting point and a breaking point, it teaches them discipline. And you also have to be aware of, like, who your kids hanging out with. If, you know, I always used to tell my kids, you don't have friends when you're in high school. You have classmates, you have colleagues, but you don't have friends. Unless somebody comes to my house, they're not your friend. Unless I meet their parents, they're not your friend. Unless they come over here and have dinner, they're not your friend. And I think we need to pay more attention and be more involved parents. And I think that's one of the reasons why the situation happened, this very sad situation happened, is because, it starts off at home. I'm not going to touch much on that one. This podcast is going well into the 15-minute mark. This is going to be one of the longest podcasts I've done so far to date. But this is just something that I feel had to be said and something I have to touch on. Once again, I am not a racist. I have nothing against any group of people out there. I don't have nothing against white people, black people, Asian people, Indian people, or anybody else like that. But I just feel like this is one of those very sensitive subjects that nobody really wants to touch on and nobody really wants to say or verbalize, because it is such a sensitive subject and no one wants to be attacked. But like I said, the name of my podcast is It Has to Be Said. We say out loud what you think in private, no topics off limits, and this is exactly what we're doing here. For those of you who have a particular subject or a topic you would like for me to touch on, you can go ahead and DM me on Instagram or YouTube. We have new podcasts that are posted every Tuesday and Thursday. If you want to leave a comment or have something you have to say in regards to this particular podcast, I would appreciate if you went on to Instagram or YouTube, and leave a comment as well. And I'll be happy to look at your feedbacks and send back replies, where needed. You guys have a good one.